Diplomacy. Senator Kaine.
Mr. Chairman, you anticipated my line of questioning, because what I want to talk about is something that's at the intersection of the Foreign Relations Committee jurisdiction and the Armed Services Committee jurisdiction, and that's the AUKUS partnership. So President Biden announced the AUKUS partnership with Australia and the UK a couple years back. It has been fleshed out. Last summer, the administration came to us to ask for enabling legislation to move the partnership forward. They thought it was going to be in the Armed Services Committee, but when I told them, no, all this comes through the Foreign Relations Committee, they said, well, good, you're on both. Can you help out? And Senator Cardin has been key to this as well. The partnership has two pillars. The first pillar is the construction over a period of about 25 years of nuclear subs that would be Australian operated and eventually Australian built to provide additional stability in the Indo-Pacific. And just for my colleagues, I was at a Navy-funded workforce training school in Danville, Virginia on Monday that the Navy has stood up to build out the submarine industrial base. There's 60 students go through in 5 different curriculum areas for an 8-week program, and students in multiple students in each of the 5 programs were from Australia. So they were not only from all over the United States, but Aussies are already training to be part of the sub-industrial base. And Aussie sailors are now part of the nuclear power school that the Navy operates in South Carolina. So even though the first subs are not going to be purchased until the 2030s or built in Australia until the 2040s, we are integrating. The second piece of AUKUS is Pillar 2, which is innovative technologies, quantum, undersea capabilities, but also AI. And I'd like to ask your own impressions about what we can do together with Australia and the UK in the Pillar 2 space to really maximize and the synergies of us working together on AI capacity that can help us in the defense of the Indo-PACOM.
Thank you, Senator. Happy to address that. I think that my overarching view here is maybe reflected in the way Senator Blinken talks about alliances and partnerships that are fit for purpose, the variable geometry of our alliances and our partnerships, and pulling on the right partners in the right fora at the right time to accomplish our highest priorities. This is a good example. Specifically, in the innovative technology pillar for AUKUS, I'll point to one thing that we announced just a few weeks ago during the Australian Prime Minister's visit. I've been working closely with Ambassador Kennedy on this for months, and that is partnership on undersea cables connecting Pacific Island countries. And what's interesting here, I wish Senator Shaheen were still here, because one of the world's leading manufacturers of undersea cables is in New Hampshire. And so we have a national champion in the United States in this regard. And we have an opportunity now to lay trusted cable to connect Australia and the United States, but also to link together other key strategic geographies in the Pacific, and do it in a way that is part of a vertically integrated technology stack. So let me just explain for a moment what I mean. The cables as the baseline connectivity. Those cables are essential for the data backhaul if we were eventually to build data centers, say, in Australia, so that key countries across the Pacific could migrate their government enterprise to the cloud, could ensure continuity of communication and continuity of operations in the event of a contingency scenario, and then put top-notch, cutting-edge cybersecurity on top of those data centers. So, again, a layered approach of trusted cables, trusted data centers, and advanced cybersecurity. So that's what we're in the early stages of doing in partnership with Australia and others in the region. I think it's really exciting, and it's a template that we ought to be able to replicate now in other geographies.
My colleagues asked questions earlier that led you to talk about some of the different approaches that the EU is taking, for example, compared to the United States, and the hope that the UK would be more aligned with the US in terms of AI regulation, less centralized, possibly. My hope would be that as we're having those discussions with the UK, we also keep Australia in mind, because I think if we're going to make this Pillar 2 part of AUKUS successful, the greatest alignment between the US and UK and Australia on matters like AI regulation would be helpful. I hope we might be able to convince the EU to come more of our way as well. But if you have any thoughts about the Australian approach to AI regulation, I'd love to hear them, but at least I would like to encourage that we include Australia in the discussions that we're having with the UK around alignment.
I agree completely, Senator. I was at Bletchley Park for the UK AI Safety Summit a couple of weeks ago. At the end of the summit, we released the Bletchley communique. Australia is a signatory there, and so I think we're fully aligned.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Young.
Well, thank you, Chairman, for holding this very important hearing. I thank our witnesses for your service. It's such an important topic we're all dealing with in various ways. I'll dive right in. Ambassador Fick, I have a number of questions for you. I ask that you keep your responses as tight as possible so we can get through them. As we think about harmonizing AI policies and R&D between partners and allies, can you speak, Ambassador, to the importance of forging clear and enforceable digital trade rules that will ensure the regulated flow of data across international boundaries that may enable future AI and machine learning systems, and which have to entail necessary cross-border privacy protections. There's a possibility that a failure to reach these sorts of rules, an agreement on the rules, may jeopardize AI collaboration and cooperation. Ambassador, do you believe it would be to America's advantage to prioritize digital trade in our multilateral and bilateral trade negotiations? Not a trick question.
Thanks, Senator. And I was at Purdue a few weeks ago in Indiana.
Yeah.
And let me just say that Keith Kroc, who's endowed a Center for Tech Diplomacy at Purdue, in many ways was my predecessor with this portfolio, and put the markers down on some essential topics, and we've tried to carry that work forward. Yes, in a word, I think that harmonizing data flows and prioritizing digital trade in our international trade agenda is an important component of American competitiveness in the 21st century.
How do we get there?
Through a series of bilateral and multilateral negotiations that result in outcomes like the US-EU data privacy framework. There's no silver bullet here. I think it's a lot of hard-fought diplomacy bilaterally and multilaterally.
I agree with you. And I know others in the administration agree with that perspective as well, because trade is at once, it's a vehicle for upward mobility, for prosperity, but also for forging tighter relationships among countries and regions. And I think it's very important that everyone in the administration regard it as such. So we'll continue to work on the Finance Committee and the Foreign Relations Committee on the topic of digital trade. Ambassador, can you speak to how your bureau is approaching the use of artificial intelligence in converging technologies like synthetic biology, especially in gene synthesis and gene editing, as you promote the responsible adoption of artificial intelligence?
I think the simplest answer to that question, Senator, is that we have seen the PRC run what we now call the Huawei playbook in telecom. It is a series of has a series of elements: IP theft, subsidies. That playbook, that rough template, is now being run by the PRC across a whole host of other emerging technologies, including synthetic biology.
All right. Thank you. There is much congressional discussion, Ambassador, around the regulation of artificial intelligence. As the chairman was kind to acknowledge earlier, I've been pretty involved in many of those conversations. And much of what we discussed has centered on whether we can use existing statutes and regulations for specific use cases of artificial intelligence. I think this is probably the approach our country will take on a going forward basis. But this same sort of debate about how conceptually you approach AI regulation extends to the global harmonization of policies across countries, across regions. there have been countless forums already, and I think that's a good thing, to discuss artificial intelligence, from the G7 to the EU, to a recent conclave on safety as it pertains to frontier models that was in the UK, and making sense of how our country is going to approach harmonization can sometimes be complicated and confusing. So from your vantage point, Ambassador, how is the department approaching this question of global harmonization? Is the intention to pursue action through existing multilateral institutions, or instead to convene special multilateral conventions or pursue bilateral agreements? And then in any harmonization effort, what role do you envision the U.S. private sector actors are going to play?
Thanks, Senator. Yes, just in the last 10 days, we've seen 4 strands come together. We've seen the AI Code of Conduct for Developers at the G7, the American Executive Order, the Bletchley Convening and Communique, and the AI Act, the EU AI Act, in trilogue negotiation. So we have this dynamic policy landscape. And our overarching next step is to try to drive these to convergence in some sort of a comprehensive policy framework that's going to be to the advantage of rights-respecting allies and partners, the U.S., the EU, the Japanese, the Australians, South Koreans, and as inclusive as possible of middle ground states that are willing to subscribe to a rights-respecting use of these technologies.
So you haven't settled, just by way of follow-up, you haven't settled on a particular format. You haven't identified who will sit in the individual seats around a table as you try and harmonize different policies. Is that accurate? I'm not asking this critically.
Sure.
But as an important investigative matter by this committee. I
think there are 2 basic approaches we could take.
Yeah.
One approach would be to form a new group, T12, a T15, a T18, and an alliance of techno-democracies, if you will. Okay. That's been in the press, in think tank world. It's been a subject of discussion. The other general approach is to use the alliances and the partnerships that we have, or to create new ones and make sure they're fit for purpose. Senator Sheen's question about NATO, Senator Kane's question about AUKUS. My view, and the view of the department, the view of the secretary, is that we should do the latter, that we should be using organizations that exist. We shouldn't be setting up new secretariats with overhead, creating new sets of meetings for people to attend. We should be using existing organizations. We should be ensuring that they're fit for purpose. And we should be making sure that technology issues and AI governance are threaded through all of them.
Okay. I very much hope that you will keep myself and other members of this committee informed of developments as it pertains to who you'll be convening, when you'll be convening them. I hope it's not in the very distant future. That is the first quarter or 2 of next year. And what you anticipate the agenda looking like.
And Senator, if I may, you asked a question about the private sector. I think it's important to address
yes,
it.
Sir.
So the private sector has been front and center in these discussions from day one, starting with the voluntary commitments of the White House. They've been involved in every multi-stakeholder consultation in the G7 and the G20 and other fora. They were present in force at Bletchley Park, widely consulted on the EO. Again, back to the point that the bulk of the innovative horsepower in our economy sits in the private sector. The bulk of our talents in the private sector. The bulk of the attack surface we care about protecting is in the private sector. This only works if it's truly a multi-stakeholder process involving governments, companies, and civil society and other organizations.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Chairman, for your patience.
And let me again acknowledge that Senator Young has been instrumental in bringing together the top experts, basically in the world, on AI in a nonpartisan environment where we can really absorb and try to understand where we are today, where we are heading, and what are our options and what are our needs. So thank you very much for that help. Appreciate it very much. Senator Risch, anything further?
Good, thank you.
Let me thank our witnesses. let me just underscore the point. We recognize this is not just a governmental exercise. It's the private sector as well. But the private sector also needs to have guardrails and needs to be protected. So that's why the global rules are incredibly important for how the United States leads in establishing those global rules, not only for state actors, but also for private companies. This conversation will continue. We anticipate there's going to be legislative action throughout 2024 in regards to AI to try to get a handle on appropriate guardrails and to give us the tools so we can continue to lead in innovation, but also in the responsible use of AI. So thank you both for your contributions, and we look forward to the continuation. The record will remain open through close of business on Friday. For members who may have questions for the record, we would ask that you respond in a timely way. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
The hearing is adjourned.